Welcome to Pasta Find. You found your pasta. Now, what is your name?
Zoe Kirk-Robinson.
What is your specialist subject?
Being a smart aleck.
Very good. Your first question. Is E.T. on the Atari the worst game ever made?
No.
Correct. Why is the worst game ever made controversial?
Because it's Count Duckula 2, and that's not technically a game, it's a resignation letter that someone published.
Correct. Why is pinball called pinball when the ball isn't made out of pins?
For the same reason, a football is not made out of feet.
Well done. Your prize today is to review Pinball on the Atari 2600 and Intellivision.
Oh, come on. I thought I was getting something nice. Pinball is one of those classic games where, in theory, it should be easy to replicate on a computer or home console. The problem with that theory is, of course, that the Atari 2600 isn't a home computer and barely counts as a console, thanks to its lack of video memory and its reliance on the user's imagination in order to overcome its poor graphical capabilities. Some games are the exception to this rule, of course. Nevertheless, Atari managed something special with this, the first console pinball game I ever saw, and perhaps the first console pinball game ever made. If you know of an earlier one, then please do leave a comment, because I really think this is the first one. Video pinball is a stunning achievement. To put together something so fluid and so fun to play on a wood panel console with a joystick that has one button is actually quite an achievement. Hang on, how are you supposed to play pinball with only one fire button? How do you choose which flipper to flip? Well, thankfully, Atari have you covered there. Forget the fire button for this game. You indicate the flipper to use by moving left or right on the joystick, which flips the left or right flipper respectively. If you want to use both at the same time, you push up instead. Sometimes it's the simple solutions that work out the best. I would still have preferred to have used a fire button because it's a better analog to using the triggers on either side of a pinball cabinet, but I have to admit this doesn't work too badly. In fact, it's a good system. Now the game itself is quite simple. You have two kickers, one on either side of the game area, a few bumpers in the middle of the screen, a couple of rollers where you can pick up bonus points, and two flippers. That's it. That's the whole game. So yeah, there's not a lot here. There are no drop targets, no drains, no ramps, no habit trails, nothing but the absolute basics. By the time video pinball was released, modern pinball machines were actually getting quite complex. They had interesting new features, none of which are replicated here. Sometimes I wonder if it's due to a lack of programming time because, as we'll see very shortly, these consoles could handle more complex systems. The other thing to remember is that not only is this the only screen in the game, but the screen isn't very well used. The features that did make it into the game are laid out in a standard Atari blocky grid, which leaves a huge amount of empty space on the screen. The ball bounces somewhat randomly, and it's possible for the ball to jump around the screen for minutes at a time without you having to press a button. See that? The bonus I've got there is racking up to 9 all on its own. I'm not even playing this game, it's playing itself. Now don't get me wrong, I've played an actual pinball machine where you can spend a lot of time just watching the ball bouncing around. You'll rack up a big score without doing anything on your own part, but it could have been so much more. It's still very good to play, sometimes it's a lot of fun in fact, but there's an awful lot of wasted potential here. For example, this is Midnight Magic. It's widely regarded as the best pinball game on the Atari 2600, and quite rightly so. It features all the same things I found in video pinball, and a lot more. There are spinners, drop targets, and even decent sound effects. Now I'll grant you that there's an awful lot here that's still left to be desired. For example, there's still a huge amount of wasted screen. But what it does represent is how much better things can be when you've got a bit more experience under your belt programming for the console. When you have the time and the skills, the Atari 2600 computes an awful lot better than a few blocks on screen, some basic ball physics, and a few limited colours. The sound effects are very simple too, as is par for the course with a lot of Atari games, because of the limitations of its beeper. Nevertheless, even with all these problems, video pinball is still recognisably pinball, and it's still fun. Even to this day, I can grab this game and get a few hours playing out of it. If you don't have an Atari 2600 to hand, which I don't, then grab a copy of Atari Anthology. It's available for PS2 and original Xbox, and it's still just as fun on there. You can also find it on various websites, such as the lovely Java Atari website, link in the description bar below. I highly recommend you give it a try and take a look at home console gaming's first pinball simulator. But what comes next? Well, after its release in the arcades in 1977, video pinball came to the 2600 in the home in 1980, demonstrating that video pinball in the home could be a success. So naturally, a slew of other video games followed, both on the 2600 and on its rivals. And it's one of the rivals that I want to take a look at now. The Intellivision was the first 16-bit home console, although you'd be hard-pressed to note it from its graphics. These look comparable to those on the ZX Spectrum, perhaps even worse in fact. And as we all know, that system was limited by its basic design feature of trying to be a cheap, universal home computer. The Intellivision doesn't have that excuse. Yes, okay, it's obviously more advanced than video pinball on the 2600, and yes, the sound is noticeably better, but is it 8 bits better? I'm not convinced. Neither were a lot of people, since the Intellivision couldn't put a dent in the 2600 sales. Nevertheless, there are a significant number of improvements to be found here. For the first part, it has multiple screens. This is achieved by flipping the game area whenever the ball passes between the various segments of the game, giving us 3 distinct play areas with 3 distinct colour schemes. The multiple screens aren't open to you automatically, however. You have to get that by hitting the rollover at the top of the screen. This is a white circle with a squiggle in it. It's a bonus for playing well enough to hit all of the drop targets, so don't expect to see it straight away. And apparently I don't play well enough, because I only got to see 2 of the screens. The footage they saw there of the third one is actually taken straight from the Attract mode demo. That's another new addition over the 2600, an Attract mode. I don't recall seeing one of those for the Atari Video Pinball. You just got a title screen on that one. Now, I'm not going to suggest that it's a big improvement that makes this game a must-have over Atari's offering, or even the later Midnight Madness, but it is something worth noting. There's a lot more polish to Intellivision's offering compared to Atari's original game. The sound effects are equally poor, however. I'm pretty sure the Intellivision was capable of more than this, but then again, so was Atari if we're honest. There's a lot you can do with a simple beeper. It doesn't have to be just plinks, bleeps and buzzers. So how does the game play? Surprisingly slow. This is a very unresponsive offering, truth be told. The 2600 may be limited, but it was very responsive. You could see the results of what you were doing immediately. I mean, okay, it had an annoying joystick control for its paddles, but when you used those controls, you saw the paddles move immediately. Here on the Intellivision, there's a slight delay. It's not enough to make the game annoying, but it is noticeable. It's also possible for the flippers to not respond at all, which makes the game a lot more frustrating than it should be. I have to wonder just how much taxing the processor is getting from this game. The button controls are far better here, however. The Intellivision has a lot of buttons on its controller, including buttons on the side by the joystick. These are used here to control the paddles, and that's replicated nicely on Intellivision Lives for the PS2, where you press L2 and R2, the large shoulder buttons, to control the paddles. It makes it feel far more like you're actually playing pinball. The game itself, aside from the slowdown compared to the Atari version, is pretty good. It has a lot going on, and it uses the screen space far better than the Atari games. Although I will freely admit a large part of that is the fact that Intellivision are covering up the otherwise empty space above the main flippers with flashing lights. The game is far from perfect, and despite its flaws, I have to admit that they are pretty limited. The Intellivision's pinball is very good. Before I picked up Intellivision Lives on the PS2, I had never actually played an Intellivision game. I've never even seen the console in real life. Nobody I knew ever had one, or if they did, they never admitted to it. I get the impression that it's one of those things that essentially disappeared into the ether. And funnily enough, the only time I've ever actually seen an Intellivision is in an episode of The Angry Video Game Nerd. And even then, he wasn't exactly pleasant to it. So I picked up this game with a bit of trepidation, despite it only costing £1 in the shop. Pinball turned me around on the Intellivision. There's a lot of polish to this game. It addresses pretty much every problem with the Atari version. There's a lot more on screen. The screen real estate is better used. And there are more than just a couple of bumpers and kickers. There are spinners, drop targets, holes leading to hidden rails, multiple screens, and actual colour. The list goes on and on. It's a good game, and I really enjoyed playing it. So there you are, a couple of the early forays into video game pinball simulation. And if I'm honest, they really are still worth playing now. That's not something you can say for every game in that era, but it is true here. So if you like playing pinball on your television, grab a couple of these games and give them a try. I think you'll really like them. But that's all we've really got time for today, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to click a like button, share it with your friends so that they'll know a good game when they see it, and do subscribe for future videos, because there will be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer on the Knob Mouse channel, and I'll see you later.